Deaf Culture, Compare and Contrast by Naomi Moss. First, let's start off by describing some of the characteristics of deaf culture. Deaf culture takes a lot of pride in being deaf. It is a major viewpoint for the deaf that they don't need to be fixed and that they are whole the way that they are. Deaf people are also a minority group and often have this shared life experience and oppression due to this. There's also a lot of intersectionality in deaf culture, as in overlapping minorities. Also, there's a big emphasis on visuals and the eyes. Overall, it can be seen as kind of a collectivism culture. They have very close community due to the shared life experiences. Deaf is a minority. Deaf people are a minority because there are a lot more hearing people than deaf people. Sometimes deaf culture is not fully accepted. In many places throughout the world, sign is not considered a complete language in its own. Luckily, in America it is, but due to this, barriers to proper education for deaf can be hard to work around. Even in places where the language is considered a full language by itself, there is still a lot of misleading ideas about the deaf community, such as the medical mindset, which views deaf people as something that needs to be fixed and not people who are whole in themselves who embrace their deafness. And most of the population is not deaf, so the world is very catered to hearing people. This leaves deaf as a minority who face struggles because of this. Minorities within a minority. Since the deaf community can already be considered an oppressed community, when someone who's in the deaf community is also part of another minority, they can have overlapping struggles due to the minorities that they're part of. This can lead to additional oppression and struggles on top of what they were already facing. An example of this would be a black man who is deaf. He might be subject to both more racism and ableism. There are many diverse communities in the deaf community. This diversity could be racial, ethnic, cultural, or even linguistic. Some of these communities include LGBTQ, Black, Latina, Asian, etc. Another diversity is differing abilities such as deaf-disabled, deaf-blind, and deaf-gain. There is a lot of culture for people of color in the deaf community. The first thing I would like to address is Black deaf culture. Black deaf culture included the development of Black ASL, which happened because of Black people getting excluded from white schools, and during this time they developed signs of their own. People of color can be underrepresented in the deaf community and also face racism. Native Americans may also face an array of issues, such as if they live on, say, a reservation, they may have limited access for education and healthcare. An important part of Native American deaf culture would be plain sign language, which is a type of sign used earlier in North America, which some people still use to this day. LGBT communities and gender issues. Being part of these communities and being deaf would make people part of two oppressed minorities. For a person, they would be more vulnerable to psychological stress, emotional stress, bullying, homophobia, transphobia, and more on top of the stressors of being deaf in a hearing world. So it's important to be open-minded to many different people. All of the groups discussed above may face intersectional challenges. American culture often centers around the norm. If you're outside of the norm, often more advocacy is needed to provide the proper support. And I think it's important to recognize that with all of these groups having their own features and characteristics that make them unique, it also contributes to individualism found here in America. Now let's compare American deaf culture to deaf culture worldwide. Here in America, ASL has been accepted as a full language. There are many different sign languages throughout the world. In terms of comparison, America is definitely a more developed deaf culture here than in places where language that empowers the deaf isn't as accepted. This has led to more popularization of deaf gain here in America. There's also more educational opportunities such as university and policies to help protect the deaf, such as the Americans with Disabilities Act. But despite all this, deaf people still face struggles worldwide. 3 of the greatest lessons I have taken away regarding oppression is that it can often be caused by assumptions and misrepresentations of people. People can view deaf people as less capable or as if they're missing something and like they need to be solved, but that's not the case, and it's these assumptions that are harmful to their community. That actually leads to my next point, that is that oppression leads to problems for minorities, because if you are being oppressed, it's hard to get the proper treatment that you should get. And the only way to stop this is for there to be more proper representation and more advocating from not only people outside of the community, but also people inside the community as well. What are 3 ideas that I have learned in regards to deaf culture that differ from American culture? The first one is the individualist versus collectivist mindset. In the deaf community, it seems like they are have a very tight community and can think of each other as a whole due to their very similar life experiences. While in America, there's a lot of variety in people's life experiences, which contributes to a more individualist view. There's also a difference in educational views where, say, in the school system, often deaf children can be isolated or not have the proper education, where in deaf culture, say you go to a university, they are catered to being deaf. There's also very different views on deafness, where deafness can almost seem like a setback, but in deaf culture, deaf people tend to embrace this part about themselves and be proud of it. There's also the visual prioritization of the deaf community. In American culture in general, there's a big emphasis on sound and speaking, such as if you turn on the TV, there's going to be people talking, and just situations like that, or like drive-thrus where the American culture is kind of catered to hearing people. Understanding of, from what I've learned so far in this class, something that I greater understand is the oppression that deaf people have faced in the campaign that was led by Alexander Graham Bell in an attempt to eradicate sign language. And he wanted to have deaf people use the oral method, which centers around speaking. I understand how this impacted the deaf community and set them back many years. I also have a greater understanding of the origin of deaf schools in America and how Goddard University was formed, which was formed by a doctor who took interest in the deaf community and went to a deaf school in Europe to study how they taught deaf people, and came back and brought those methods here. I also have a better understanding of the history of auditory technology. It started with the ear trumpet used to amplify sounds in the 1950s, and in 1984, cochlear implant surgery was approved by the FDA, and in 1990, hearing screening became required in all 50 states in the U.S. And then here are my sources.